Alright, so boom. We know that a lot of South African traditional clothing has these very overt Western influences, be it substituting animal skins for imported cotton, covering breasts in the name of modesty, or altering how hair is styled. And for a long time, I've always thought this was a case of assimilation, where the oppressed group completely submits to the dominant powers. But as I've been working on this traditional Pedi dress project, I've now realized I should have given my ancestors a little bit more credit. Because what you see in the way a lot of cultural clothing has developed over time is actually a case of cultural authentication. And in fashion, this is the process where a new item or design is adopted and then reinterpreted by a group to fit their traditions, customs, and beliefs. So settlers and missionaries might impose a certain standard in order to civilize people, but it's never really successful. Time and time again, we see African communities come up with very interesting ways to retain their identity and expression, even if it appears they're abiding to a new order. It's obviously a fantasy to get a very clear, accurate picture of pre-colonial dress in that there's not a lot of widely accessible information that's managed to survive. Part of this is thanks to epistemic sovereignty, try saying that 3 times, where communities tightly control and gatekeep their knowledge and cultural production. If you think of the secrecy around Xhosa initiation practices, for example, which are also even gate-kept from people in that culture, not very well of them, or retaining information in oral tradition, where you not only have to know the language, but be physically present to experience that information. A bigger part of this, though, is thanks to how history is documented and archived, and who decides what deserves recording and why. But from my research and also just looking at current practices and asking around a lot, I think it's safe to say that the historic clothing of Pedi women consisted primarily of 2 aprons, a back and front covering. The front is a teto and the back ntepa. If unmarried, it was standard for women to be topless. Where some societies have demarcations in dress according to marital status or rank, much of Pedi women's clothing is divided across initiation rituals, so they are the pre-initiated and the initiated. Everyone wears aprons, but the length and decorations and different aspects of them change as you age or go through these ceremonies. I was really fortunate to see one up close at Museum Africa recently, and there's a very cool reverse applique done where the fur side of the cowhide is cut into a cross motif and then put onto the leather side of it. And it's quite consistent with the examples I've seen online, along with a lot of these circle and diamond shapes that are rendered with beading. I haven't been able to find any specific information as to why these particular shapes. I mean, diamonds, triangles, circles, squares are very common in Southern and East African beading, and I can maybe assume they might also represent things like femininity or the family unit, the circle of life, and so on, but that's mostly conjecture. It's very hard to say because these things change so often over time and can be so specific, not just to a region, but a combination of individual life experiences or events that happen in your particular village or put together. Plus, they haven't really seemed to survive in a lot of the modern Pedi examples I've seen. Also, before anyone yells at me, I am aware that I'm not using the most accurate terminology here. Thanks to a bunch of apartheid nonsense, we categorize communities in South Africa according to shared languages, which tends to ignore distinct clans and dialects within these groupings. There are something like over 600 Bantu languages on the continent, primarily spoken by people in Central, Southern, and Southeast Africa. The most widely spoken one is Swahili. Because of a bunch of migration in ancient times that I'm not going to bore you with, the land we now know as South Africa consists of 4 main Bantu-speaking groups, which are Nguni, Sotho, Tsonga, and Venda. The Nguni languages are Ndebele, Zulu, Swati, and Xhosa, and then under Sotho we have Tswana, Southern Sotho, and Northern Sotho. Pedi is actually just one dialect of Northern Sotho, but colloquially we tend to kind of refer to all Northern Sotho speakers as Pedi. Some people get a bit more specific about this, but a big part of this is thanks to the work of German missionaries, who besides having colonized a lot of Northern Sotho speakers, also created the Pedi Bible, which made Pedi the main dialect from which standardized Northern Sotho is written and taught. I would have loved to get into more specific differences within the different groups, but beyond some detailed information about a few Lobedu practices, you'll have heard of them if you know anything about the Rain Queen, it does seem that a lot of the customs around dress and initiation kind of just get mushed together across what are at least 10 different subgroups. And part of also why I'm not familiar with some of these distinctions is because of how much Pedi women's clothing is structured around those previously mentioned initiation rites, which aren't really practiced by Christianized families like mine. I've double-checked with some of my other Pedi friends as well who also shared similar experiences. Though interestingly, the uniform of our church is still very much in line with what you see in traditional Pedi clothing. A large portion of my family are a part of the Zion Christian Church, which is one of the largest African initiated churches. That just means it wasn't founded by missionaries, and as a result, there's a mixing of Christian theology with indigenous spirituality. And I think that's probably why the overall look still shares the khempe, which is this smocked cotton blouse that was introduced by the Germans for, of course, modesty reasons. As I mentioned before, everyone was walking around topless. For children, this would have been a very little cropped top with just a frill, and then for initiated women, it would be much longer and have big puff sleeves. It's very difficult to find historical examples of these online, so I did something absolutely insane and I left my house to investigate. I spent a really great afternoon at the Brenthurst Library looking through a bunch of Barbara Tyrrell illustrations, which I can't share with you because there's a whole bunch of permissions you have to get, and before I could go back to do that, my car got stolen. And it's really far, so for now you're just going to have to believe me and enjoy these notes and sketches I made while I was there. For my version, however, I actually referenced a lot of 1830s European dresses for my construction, particularly those from the Romantic era, because this whole thing was actually inspired by me watching Nosferatu with my friends earlier this year, and like that's just what you get for letting me leave the house. And I just kept seeing all these parallels between the silhouettes while I was watching the movie. They both feature puffed sleeves, raised waistlines, pleated skirts ending above the ankle, and applied trim on the bodice. And actually, I had kind of realized a little bit of this last year, and I'd attempted a similar project, but at that time I had just looked at everything visually, took the stuff I liked, mashed it together, and came up with a really cute thing.
So I was very worried about these darts, but I think it's more a sewing issue than it is like a pattern issue. Like I think I'm just very out of practice with these. Because this one actually is almost okay. This one's a little bit weird. The other thing I'm also remembering is that I don't know if I'll be wearing this with a bra. So perhaps I might take it in a bit more to accommodate for that. Or I think, yeah, with some boning and padding it should. You know what, actually, I'll pad it out. Yeah, I'll pad it out. Oh no, I just dropped a pin in the bathtub. That's not good. But right now I'm thinking that instead of making a million amendment adjustments and then that I have to go replicate back to my paper pattern, I want to go redrape this, because I first draped this on my other dress form, which is like very wonky and very far away from my size, and I do have my actual dressmaker's dress form here with me again, and I can actually tailor that to my measurements much better. So I think actually I will just sort of use this as a guide and redrape it. Also because I'm just realizing things now, like I do want this to be slightly higher at the shoulder, like to sit right there. So yeah, we're gonna I feel really bad, but I'm gonna scrap this. Actually, should I feel like I'm also wasting fabric, do you know what I mean? Because also I think maybe I should just try sew this up and see. But you know, I'd really rather just have a perfect pattern to work off of. But the idea of sewing this again is like, well, cutting everything out and then sewing it again is a bit ridiculous to me right now. I don't know which part of me is being lazy or inefficient. Like, is it lazy to not want to just redrape it, or am I being inefficient by not just working with the thing I already have and just making edits? Do you know what I mean? The other thing is I still need to test out my sleeves as well, so I'm like, I don't know if I'm wasting time. Alrighty, cutting up a pillowcase to use for draping fabric. This is my favorite stuff to use because then it means I don't have to do laundry. 100% joking. I never do laundry. There's always weird garbage in the corners of these things. It's so gross. So usually I'm really good at doing like curved darts, which I prefer fit-wise because I feel like obviously your body's not straight, so why would you have like a straight dart? And I also just like sort of them as a design detail when they like, you know, go across the garment. But I think that's also part of where I messed up a little bit there. Is I was a bit too dramatic with my curve. So I'm gonna go a little bit gentler this time. I don't have enough of this blue fabric left to cut all of these pieces out twice so that I can flatline them. But I already cut the sleeve out of this and I would like for it to match. I'm trying to think if I have anything that will work. And this is a conundrum because I would like for this mockup to be wearable. Just because I just hate the idea of just like making something that I'm not going to use it again. A while ago I had also had the idea of just having, if the mockup was good enough, then it would become the lining, but I don't really want to do that either. So I'd initially cut out this long thing and it was going to be like a peplum skirt thing for the bodice, but I'm thinking I can just abandon that part because it's way more important to just really get the fit of this right. And I have enough of this and then that little piece there that should be able to suffice to be able to do this, and then all the pieces are flatlined. I feel like I'm being a bit pedantic doing this like hand basting right now for what is still a mock-up, but I also feel like some of the fit issues I was seeing on the previous one was because of bubbling between the two layers. So I think getting that out of the way now will give me a much more accurate idea of the fit. We're trying to be just more thorough and precise with things, you know what I mean? I need to stop saying you know what I mean. Like, do I not know other words? Alrighty, suicide has been postponed. This is much better. I also realized some of the issues can also be solved by just getting a little boning. So maybe over here and at the sides and at the back. Plus my final fabric is going to be a lot more tightly woven. Like I'm going to be lining with twill. So I think it'll also just hold structure well. This line here is like a little bit below my actual natural waist, and for both 1830s dresses and also a lot of the like Pedi dresses I was looking at, you are a little bit higher than your natural waistline. So this bottom line here should be at my natural waist, which is up here. So, but that's a very simple fix, and this you're just going to cut from the bottom. And then I was trying to decide whether I'm going to go with pleats or gathers for the final thing. I think I will end up doing pleats, but for this, I think gathers work really cute. Also, this kind of works as a very cute top for now, so I'm very happy with it. And then, as expected, I just need to take in here at the shoulders. I think I'm gonna have to practice a little bit more with my dots. I don't know what's going on. Also, I really like this top with these shorts. I think I have found a fun little silhouette that I'm gonna try out now. But again, it is now 8 p.m. I've been doing this like since 10 a.m. or something. I don't know, I'm very tired. So I'm not going to make any of those adjustments now. I'm going to turn everything off, let the iron cool down, have something to eat, call my situationship. I'm not going to touch this tomorrow. I have to actually work and do other stuff. Probably come back to this on Tuesday or Wednesday. I wanted to be done with the whole thing, like the final outfit, by this weekend to shoot, but I think that's a bit of pipe dream because there's also so much embroidery and stuff that I still want to do. I need to figure out the plan for all of that. But luckily I have this now, so I can start drawing on this and seeing the proportions and stuff. I'm supposed to have like washed my face and gotten ready for bed, but this dart thing is keeping me up. I've now watched 2 hours of videos on different ways to sew darts, and I'm starting to realize that I don't think the problem is me. And I'm looking at this, right? And I'm looking at this at the side here, and what's happening is this dart keeps going out like this, which means that I just need to, I think I need to adjust the shape of the curve of the dart. So at the top here, it shouldn't be extending out. It shouldn't be convex. It should be concave. I think for this mock-up, I'm going to turn this into a princess seam. But then I'm gonna go practice it out because I'm not letting fabric beat me. I feel like a crazy person right now, but like, this is not on. Now I'm gonna make those adjustments and hopefully win this one.
And all of this was before I learned about the German influence. And it's really funny that this 2024 film, Nosferatu, if you don't know, is actually set in Germany. And I also really wanted to work with the romantic dresses because I thought bringing the various elements from the different periods and places would give me a better idea of what exactly in this blouse was imposed versus originated. How much of this was an invention of my ancestors versus how much of this was brought over from Germany. Also try to look for specifically German trends or designs in this period, because as much as the hempe reminds me of these romantic dresses, there are still quite a lot of differences. Though the most common form of the hempe really took shape and became widely adopted in the 20th century, many decades after Ellen could have saved that little town by just having a threesome, if you ask me. Unfortunately, I really struggle to find anything particularly unique about German fashion in this time. A lot of the distinction seems to be more in fine art if you look at like the Expressionist movement. However, I did also find some unexpected crossover with the dirndl, which was funny because the dirndl kind of has a similar evolution to a lot of African cultural clothing in that it's a myth, it's a hoax, it's an invented tradition. As Germany began establishing a national identity, something European states didn't have before the 19th and 20th centuries, because countries, nations as we know them, didn't really exist, nationalists created a historical German ideal for these once disparate groups to unify behind. And you kind of see a parallel with sort of the Hempe becoming this cultural ideal for a bunch of these different Pedi subgroups to unify behind. And it's also not very much unlike the current American preoccupation with this very imagined 1950s America, and it allows for people to create a visual representation for their ideal society, though in the German and American case it's quite conservative and often very fascist, a time where women are women, men are men, and non-whites should die. Actually, that's not the funny part. The funnier part is that this is also another one of those cases where you really see how white supremacy hurts white people as well, because their entire identity and individuality and culture has to be manufactured and then flattened in order to create a singular white ideal. And in that, you lose any diversity or difference that may have existed before. That's neither here nor there. After a very grueling mock-up process, I went to visit my friend Cole, who I'm collaborating with for the final shoot of this whole thing. I'm very excited. So the next video in this project is going to go into more detail about the final making process and some explanations of my embellishment choices. I've been doing some really interesting research into Northern Sotho cave drawings as well. And then I'm also really interested in kind of digging into a African perspective on a lot of romantic Gothic ideals that we see in this Nosferatu period, which also really inspired the way the final shoot is going to look. And I'm not really sure I've reached a finite answer about the degree of outside force in this clothing, and I'm also not sure if it matters that much anymore. So this is just kind of to start seeing what the trim placement would kind of look like on the bodice. I just wanted to test out some sort of ideas of trim. I haven't even figured out exactly what everything's going to be. I do know I definitely want to use this. This is from my birthday dress from like 3-4 years ago. I took it off, but I think this will go really well with my fabric. And I wasn't actually planning to go with something as big as this. I was hoping to do some sort of frill around here, but I'm actually really enjoying the size of this and the look of sort of like a little puffed trim kind of thing. So I think I actually might do this. Maybe a little bit smaller though still, but it's kind of tough. A lot of these things you just have to do to see, but I just want to have an idea of like what I'm doing so that I can focus my time. For complete transparency, I started this in February. It is now May. I've actually already completely shot this and everything. But in the past, 3-4 months, I've had a lot of time to think about this. And I think a more interesting question than, who owns what or who brought what over is who are the who's that I'm talking about, and what do these different aspects tell us about these people? What do these different aspects reveal to me about the way I grew up and where I come from? And finally, also, what can I do with that information today? Hello, I am finally ready to call this whole mock-up stage done. I really need to get started on the final piece because I have less than a week to sew it. So I have made some adjustments already on my final patterns, but I'm just going to walk you through sort of our final outcome of this mock-up. So I realized that I was wearing these straps way too low, which is what was giving me a lot of this weird pulling and bunching and excess fabric at the back. Forgetting that when I had drafted this, I had kind of put these at the tip of the shoulder. So when I put these up here, a lot of that excess and bubbling gets quite eliminated. The other thing I also realized with 1830s bodices is that they're actually, the fronts are meant to be on the bias, and that will help with keeping these on my shoulder, so that's fine. And then that also means I can reduce a lot more. So I've also taken it in quite a bit on the sides of my final pattern because there's just, there's a bit of excess room everywhere, and I like to be snatched. And then let's talk about this sad sleeve. I was so shocked because I cut out such a huge piece of fabric for this, and
Nothing. Like, this is so small. So I'm just gonna work on making this much, much bigger, also a little bit longer. But also I hate anything elbow length, to be very honest. Like, it's either we're showing most of the arm or we show none of it at all. So I think I'll make it just like a couple centimeters longer, and then just much, much fuller, which is gonna be so much fun. I don't know, I love big sleeves, but sometimes I feel like it's such a waste of fabric. I'm like, oh, but yeah. And then I was also just experimenting with how I might want to arrange the gathers and stuff. I really like the idea of sort of doing 3 or 4, a couple of rows of pleats up here. It's very similar to some of my 1830s references. But I think this looks quite weird when it's like really straight this side. So at the bottom, I'm going to make sure that there's gathers all the way around. And then also continue the gathers here a little bit further into the arm side. So maybe around this point, I think. So just strictly the underarm section here is where there's no gathers. But yeah, we can also stand... Actually, we don't really need that much in the back. Excuse how poorly sewn that is. And then, the last thing also is just sort of closures. So obviously, initially I was like basing this sort of on 1830s designs. And as a result, I was trying to think about a way to make the zipper look invisible. I don't like to use invisible zippers just because I don't find them dependable. I just feel like they're too easy to break. And I also think in the final, I'd like to use a metal zipper. It's also something I just want to continue doing moving forward, is prioritize metal zippers over plastic. And also they just tend to last longer. So I was just trying to practice with this to try and make it look invisible, but it honestly really wasn't working, because the other thing is that with the way I was doing it, because this thing is so tight, as soon as I wear it, I put any strain on it, the zipper is going to get exposed. So I've decided I'm going to just make peace with the fact that the zipper will be visible. Plus, as I was doing my research, I did realize that like this Pedi silhouette, right, of this blouse really does emerge sort of in the mid-20th century, a time where zippers exist. So it's fine to do it, like it's okay. And also no one except me cares. So like, and also I can't even see the back of myself anyway, so that doesn't really matter. And also I have all this long hair, it's perfect, so we'll see. So sorry, I wasn't sure you could see the whole silhouette, but like, look at that. This is such a cut look. Oh my god, I'm so excited about it. Yeah, I really wanna. Oh, okay, I love this look. I'm so excited.